If you want to smoothly glide from groove to fill and then back to groove again, and therefore play songs and jam confidently with a band, then you are in the right place today. The problem is that our fill transitions often just get sloppy and clumsy and out of time, which leaves us feeling frustrated and defeated and honestly feeling like a total fraud, like we're not even a real drummer. So let's fix this today. I'm teaching you the big mental secret to overcoming all of this, as well as 3 concrete exercises and 5 practical tips that will show you exactly how to practice fill transitions and prepare you for playing with other musicians and for sounding like a total pro in the process. You can do this. Welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're here hanging out with me today. I help hobby drummers and a lot of semi-pro players become the drummers that others want to play with by teaching you the core drumming skills that save you time in the practice room. And hey, how would you like to know the quickest possible way to master the drums? See, the thing is, there are a million things you could be practicing, a million things the internet will tell you to be practicing on the drums, but you ain't got time for that because the truth is you don't have to practice everything in order to get really good at the drums. I want to give you a shortcut. I want to give you a cheat sheet and help you cut to the chase, focus your practicing. So I want you to grab my totally free PDF e-guide. It's called Know What to Practice, the 3-part daily practice routine for getting you faster results in less time, having more productive practicing because you know exactly here are the exercises to practice, here are the concepts to focus on. This is going to get you results in less time. Total no-brainer. Go grab it, make some progress on the drums today. All right, on with today's lesson. I think if we're all honest, probably our biggest really specific fear when it comes to playing fills is just playing them out of time. We're afraid of playing something clumsily, playing this note at the wrong spot, or starting the fill at the wrong time. So by the time we go out of the fill, we've lost the band because we've come in a beat late or we flipped the beat around in our head. And so it's that whole transition thing that just scares us. Believe me, I've been there. I had so many messed up fills when I was first getting started playing. But the cool thing is that there are ways to remedy this. It takes some practice, it takes some time, just a lot of repetition and building up the experience of doing this a lot, and you can overcome the whole challenge of fill transitions. Believe me, you can definitely overcome this. Just be patient. Let's work through these steps today. So the first thing I want to share with you, and at first I wasn't even going to put this into this lesson because it's actually something we've covered in another video about fill transitions here on the channel, but I have to mention this now in case you haven't seen that other video, and I'm going to link that other lesson below if you want to go check it out. But something that could be the culprit when it comes to your fill transitions, it might be as simple as an inability to smoothly go from this, so just 8th notes with your right hand, to alternating 16th notes with both hands, and then back. That right there, because think about it. Most songs, definitely not every song, and there are a lot of exceptions to this, and so a lot of songs, though, we're playing 8th note time, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then when we play a fill, we might play a 16th note fill. Ga 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 boom, ga doom boom doom ga 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 boom. The simplest fills are like that a lot of times, and if you're new to the drums, those are some great fills to get started with. Maybe boom doom ga doom ga 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 goo 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 boom doom ga doom boom doom ga 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 ga. Either starting on beat 3 or starting on beat 4. 1 and 2 and 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E and a ga 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 ga, the classic ga 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 fill. So those are great, super simple ones. And if you're having issues right there, it might just be that you've got to train your hands to go from 8th notes to 16th notes while staying in time. And so it might be as simple as pull out your practice pad. This is something you can do on the kit or away from the kit. Turn your metronome on, practice playing 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3, and then go to 16ths, 1 E and a 2, and back to 8ths, while making sure you're staying in time. This could very well expose a fundamental physical issue going on that's tripping you up here. And if there's an issue here, then there's going to be havoc wreaked on a lot of where we're going today. So that's why I think it is important that we cover this. So make sure that you're squared away in that department. Make sure that you're able to sit here and play 8th notes with your right hand, go into 16ths. You can practice this left hand lead too if you want to. 1 and 2 and. Whole idea is be able to keep a hand constant. So you're keeping that constant timekeeping while changing the note value, maybe going twice as fast or going twice as slow, however you want to think of it. Because maybe another way to practice this would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2. Can you go to quarter notes without speeding up or slowing down? So practice doing that with your metronome. Just the whole concept of going back and forth between different note values, different subdivisions. That's another word for it, going between quarters, eighths, sixteenths. If you can do that well, then you're ready to really dive into this, because ultimately this is actually a mental thing, and that's where we're going today. In that previous lesson, we talked about the physical, the technical, but really we've also got to go into the mental stuff, because that could very well be the issue going on. So the big mental secret I've been alluding to is this: think ahead, be intentional, and plan what's coming. So know what fill you're going to play ahead of time, hear it in your head, know what groove, and especially kick pattern, you're going to play, know it like the back of your hand. That's it. That's the secret. So it sounds simple, but yet very involved, and that's why we're getting into the depth and the nitty-gritty of all this. But that's pretty much all it is. If you can know ahead of time, here's what I'm going to play, and then as you're playing that, remember what the groove is and know what you're going back into, you're going to be fine. So it means thinking about a few things at once. So we've got to talk about how to do this. That is the bulk of the lesson today. We could just turn off the lesson right now and say, hey, I told you what the big secret was, but that does you no good if you don't know how to accomplish that and how to get there. But I hope you know that you can get there. So how do we do these things? Well, first question for you, are you a visual or an aural learner? Now, odds are if you're into music, you're playing the drums, you're probably a bit of an aural learner at least. But maybe you're also a very visual learner. I think I'm probably more a visual learner, but at the same time, I learn songs by ear. So I don't know, aural and visual. And then there's also those of us who learn the best by doing. And of course, we're going to do a lot of doing because we're physically actively playing the drums. So doing is always going to happen. But I want you thinking about this. Do you learn and memorize best orally by listening to something or by seeing it? Because that's going to determine what your best course of action is here. So for the aural learners, and I think all of us are this to a degree or else we wouldn't be into music, what we want to do, whatever the song is you're working on, whatever the groove, the fill is that you're practicing right now that you're stuck on, I want you to think of that. Think of the song. What's the song where the transitions have just been plaguing you, driving you nuts? Something that you've been jamming on maybe, and you're just having a hard time with those fill transitions. I want you to think of that. And here's what I want you to do. Play that groove over and over again until you don't have to think about it. Now, this might not sound like the fun, quick, easy way to get where we're going today, but if you can do that, that's huge, because what that does is it puts that groove on autopilot. What you have to keep in mind is that we need to build coordination here, and coordination isn't just, doing a bunch of different things with different limbs. It's putting things on autopilot. And when you loop a groove over and over and over again, you build that kind of autopilot playing where you're able to listen better and be more aware of what you're doing. And so that's really important. Now, here's how I want you to test it. This is where it gets a little bit more challenging. So not only are we going to play this same groove over and over again, whatever this groove is, but we're also going to incorporate what I call the dynamic independence exercise. So let's say this is a super simple groove like this. So that's our groove, and you've been playing it over and over again with your metronome, ideally, playing it over and over again until it becomes more and more autopilot. You're not having to think about what it is. It's kind of like when you say a word over and over again and suddenly the word starts to sound different and it starts to sound like gibberish because you're hearing it over and over again. Sometimes that can happen when you play something over and over again, but you're building this muscle memory, you're building your coordination, it's getting more and more autopilot. Next thing we want to do is start playing around with the volumes because we want to build dynamic independence. Let's see if you can do this. If you can't, that's okay. It takes some time, it takes some practice. First thing I want you to do, we're just playing it like a medium volume. I'm not at all playing very loudly, I'm playing fairly softly here. So we've got our bass level volume. So start playing at that volume. Then, after a measure or two, start playing louder with the kick, but don't let your hands get any louder. So gradually the kick got louder and then it gradually got softer. That's what I want you to practice doing, like phasing the volume up and then back down over a couple of measures, but without your hands changing volume. Practice that. That's going to really push your right foot coordination because your brain is having to shift focus down to here while this is having to stay in place. That's why it's so important that this is already feeling very autopilot first. Then once you've done that, let's try making the right hand louder and then softer. So it might sound like this. Get super loud as you can, super soft as you can. And of course, right now I'm not playing no metronome, as you can see by my in-ears draped here over the hi-hat. But practice this also with a metronome. Make sure your time is staying steady as your dynamics are changing. Then do it with the snare. So start off with maybe medium volume snare, gradually get louder, but try to not let the kick get louder, and then get softer. And if you're having trouble at any point here, just focus on that specific dynamic setting. So for instance, it can be weird playing really soft backbeats and loud kicks. So practice that specifically. Sit here and go. Maybe with soft right hand too, or with loud right hand. So like right and right, right hand and right foot loud, left hand soft. Target those weak combinations, whichever ones feel the weirdest, whichever ones you have the hardest time doing and controlling, practice those. Now, kind of a side note here regarding general kick mixing. Most of the time when you're playing rock grooves, you want your kick to be loud because it's not a naturally like loud ear-piercing instrument on your kit because it's so low, right? So you really need to be nice and strong on the kick drum, and even if you're super loud on it, it's not gonna be perceived by an audience member as, whoa, that drummer's way too loud, his kick drum's too loud. Nobody's ever going to say that. It's usually going to be cymbals are too loud or maybe the snare is too loud. Most of the time, though, you can be really strong on the kick and even pretty strong on the snare because the snare is such a short sound as long as you stay light on the cymbals. And so keep that in mind. You don't want your grooves to be top heavy. You want them to have a nice solid foundation. So be strong on the kick, strong on the snare, not too heavy on the cymbals. Versus if you're playing jazz, that's where you want to be heavier on cymbals because cymbals drive it more, lighter on the kick and the snare. So just a side note there, depending on style of music you're playing and just some general kit mixing tips, those are things you want to keep in mind. And so that's kind of the side note here. If you're practicing this, you're not only learning the groove more solidly, because that's our main purpose here, but you're also sounding better. You're starting to think in terms of balance and volume, and that's really important to sounding less amateur and more professional. Basically, the one word we could put on this is awareness. You're becoming more and more aware of what you're playing because you're focusing your brain and your ear on one limb at a time without changing the rhythms, without changing the parts. You're just thinking about how you're hitting, maybe where you're hitting the hi-hat, whether or not you're playing rim shots on the snare, how hard you're hitting the kick. It builds your awareness a lot, which is really key. Now let's talk visual stuff. So for you visual learners, and this is definitely myself included, I feel like I can learn grooves and fills and patterns more when I can picture them in my head. So the best way to do this, honestly, is to notate the groove and keep a mental picture of that notated groove in your head. Now, I know many of you are like, Steven, I don't know notation. That's like total foreign language to me when I look at it. It makes no sense to me. I don't know notation, so how am I supposed to do this? Well, a simpler way is just to count the groove out. So we know if we're playing an eighth note groove, like our example groove here. A lot of drummers who don't even necessarily know or use traditional notation, they still might have some form of like writing out a groove in shorthand, or at least picturing it in their head based on that counting. Because if you picture a grid, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, we've got those ands, so those kick notes that happen after the beats, in between the beats, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So however you can picture that in your head, if you want to work on notation so that you can like see it written out in notation form, that's what I do. But I come from a piano background. I was a kid who took piano lessons for a long time, and so I already knew notation well getting into the drums. So that made sense for me. It might not totally make sense for you, but find some way to picture that. Like maybe you're picturing a grid, you're seeing the 4 beats, and you're seeing where the notes land in relation to those beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So form a mental picture. Now, I do recommend learn some notation. Even if you don't want to adapt traditional notation, learn how to do it so then you can adapt it to whatever you want it to be. The cool thing about drums, there's no hard and fast rules. We're not talking classical violin here or classical piano. Kind of the Wild West in a way. You can do notation however you want to, and you can write shorthand charts. I write shorthand charts to learn songs. As a matter of fact, I've got some lessons here on the channel about that. And so if you want to check out notation, chart writing, those kinds of things, that can help out so much in this department. That might be your gateway here. If you can learn how to notate grooves and learn how to write out an arrangement of a song, that could be the key to getting you out of the fear of fill transitions. And so definitely check that out. I'm going to link some lessons on that topic in the description. Basically what we're getting at here, we want there to be a picture in your head. You want to be able to picture the groove in your head because that makes memorization so much easier because you can instantly recall it. The groove I've been playing is a very simple groove, and so if I need to remember that groove for a song, I'm always going to think and of 2. That's that and of 2 groove. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and. It's kind of like a type of groove in my mind. It's one of those and of 2 grooves versus like a 1 and 2 and 3 and. That would be like a 3 and groove. So however you want to think of it, if you can picture it in your head, it's going to help you recall it much more easily. Now, a great way to really work these skills early on, especially if you're a beginner, or even if you've been playing for a long time, maybe you've even been like a semi-pro, you've been playing gigs, you've been doing all this stuff, but maybe you've just never like worked through a drumming method, you've never really learned notation. I would really encourage you to check out this book, Realistic Rock. This is one of those classic methods. It's from like 1971, 72. It's been around for a long time, in like 50 years. Classic rock drumming method, and I love the way the notation is done in this book. I like the way it's formatted. It all makes great sense. It makes mathematical sense. It's easy to read. It's just a 3-line staff. This is not piano where you've got, 5 lines and 4 spaces. This is just 3-line simple staff, kick, snare, cymbal. Easy to read. And so honestly, if you want to learn notation and start seeing grooves better and building up your groove vocabulary, this is a great way to go. I know it sounds like a commercial. This is not not at all an official endorsement. I love that method. It's something I worked through. First thing my teacher worked through with me in high school, and I've had so many students work through it and really have a lot of success out of it because it builds coordination, it builds groove vocabulary, helps you get better at reading. So those are all the steps I want you to go through. The aural step being the dynamic independence thing, the repetition. The visual step being notate the groove, count the groove, picture it in your head, whatever way you need to, and reference, go check out the notation lesson for more detail on that. Then repeat these steps with the fill. Now I recommend starting out, find a fairly simple fill you can do this with. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. Honestly, even the In the Air Tonight fill is not a complicated fill. Boom, boom. But that's a fill that probably you've heard so many times, nobody needs to write that one out because you can just hear it in your head. And so a lot of fills, it's easier to memorize it orally because all right, it starts on beat 1, boom, boom, and there's, those pairs of notes, 1, 2, 1, 2, those groupings of notes together, so you just feel it and you hear it easily. So pick a fill that you know really well like that, or that's simple like boom, 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 ga, 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 boom, or a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone fill, crash. That fill starts on beat 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So start off with something simple like that, and what I want you to do is follow these steps, play that fill over and over and over again. Just over and over again. You don't really have to worry about the dynamic independence thing because that might get weird when you're doing fills. As far as doing different hands of different dynamics, but do the repetition over and over again with your metronome, and then just form a picture of that in your head, however you need to picture it. For me, when I think of the Pat Boone, Debbie Boone fill, I'm just thinking of, it starts on beat 3, it starts with 8th notes and then goes into 16ths. I'm not even necessarily picturing the exact notation, I just know roughly how it sounds. Boom, boom, boom. 3, boom, bum, boom, boom, bum. And I've played it so many times because it showed up in so many songs. It's just one of those fills I'll always hear and I can always count on. And so have some basic fills like that you can always count on, whether it's basic flam fills, 3 and 4 and. Think of just simple things like that. Those are the things to start with here. Don't focus too much on complex fills yet, though you'll get there. Do this with simple fills first so you can get confident in those transitions. A lot of times too, a problem with the reason why we're fearing the fill transitions is because we're either trying to play too many notes or we're so worried about what our hands are doing that we're not really listening. But if you take that listening approach, again, it's that awareness, that intentionality, and you decide, here's what I'm going to play, you're listening to it, and so you're not going to fail. You're going to play it smoothly, you're going to play it in time, you're going to go back into the groove. And so you absolutely can build up that confidence to be able to just jam with a band, play well with a band, play songs, and know that you can confidently, smoothly go into and out of fills without fear. But know that this takes time. this whole thing is definitely a process and not an event. I mentioned that, like every drummer, I've struggled with this. And when I was first playing in high school, first playing with a band, there were a lot of fills that were scary to me because I knew when I launched into that fill, I could not 100% count on knowing I was going to come out of it in time. But the more I focused, this sounds kind of funny, the more I focused less on the hands and the chops and the notes I was playing, and the more I focused on what it sounded like and what sound and music and melody and rhythm I was creating, the less fear there was because it fit better, it was more intentional, and made more sense. So that's kind of an underlying concept here of, rather than thinking about going through all these notes and that being a fill, think more in terms of specific, make the fill feel more like an extension of the groove. It doesn't have to be anything fast. It can be more of a rhythmic kind of melody, nothing crazy, and that's going to make it so much easier to stay right there in the pocket and in time. And so practice those things over and over again. Know that it takes time, but you will absolutely get there because you'll train your ear, you'll develop your ear more and more. Now, we can't end this just yet because I'd still be leaving you hanging because there's still some challenges that come with all of this, and you might have, if you followed along with me here, and you've been doing some of these steps like the dynamic independence exercise, you realize, this is tough. This isn't very easy, and it's not like, how am I supposed to be thinking about the fill that's coming up while I'm trying to play this groove and keep the groove correct? And then how am I supposed to remember the kick drum pattern of the groove while I'm trying to play this fill right, and all the while I'm trying to stay in time and I'm trying to listen to what's going on around me? There's a lot of things you have to think about at once to really pull this off. And I don't want to overcomplicate this. I definitely don't want to overwhelm you. But when you're playing a gig and when you're playing with a band and when you're recording, there are a lot of things that you have to think about. That's just the nature of this craft that we're learning. That's what you have to do to be a good drummer. You have to not just think about, what your hands are doing, but you've got to think about the sounds you're creating, the rhythms you're playing. How does that fit here? How does that fit there? And thinking about time and making sure it stays in time. So what does this mean? It means that there's a big underlying skill that all of this comes down to. This big core fundamental skill that has to be in place to really be able to execute all of this well. You can probably guess what this is if you've been tracking with me, and it is coordination. You have to be able to think about multiple things at once. You've got to have a good, solid level of coordination to be able to pull this off. So we're not going deep into coordination exercises today, although doing that dynamic independence exercise earlier, that alone is a great coordination exercise. Realistic rock, fantastic coordination exercises there. Get that method book. You'll thank yourself later. And I've got some additional lessons here on the channel about it, so go check those out. I'll link them below. But for now, I want to wrap up by giving you 5 practical tips for building your coordination. So basically, like 5 areas you can go, 5 different things you might work on, whichever you choose. Number 1, use repetition in everything that you play. So what's interesting is that when you play something over and over again, repetition, it kind of helps put things on autopilot. And when things get more on autopilot, they become more comfortable because you don't have to think as hard about them. Suddenly your ceiling is higher, you've got more headroom, you're not constantly like teetering on the edge about to train wreck and fall apart. That repetition builds comfort, and comfort is really just another word for coordination. The more of that comfort you build, the more coordination you have. And likewise, the more coordination you build, the more comfort you're going to have. And so use that repetition. Know that practicing anything slowly, cleanly, precisely, over and over again is going to build coordination, no matter how simple it is. Number 2, play along to songs a bunch. This was so key for me when I was in high school and first just learning and being a sponge and absorbing as much as I could. I was working coordination exercises, but what's even more important than working the coordination exercises is applying that. Because if you're just sitting down at the drums a few minutes each day and playing through exercises, that's going to help, and that is important. That's an important part of practice. But you've got to be using these things. You've got to be bridging that gap between, the technical, the exercises, and the music. Because when you can bridge that gap, not only are you getting tons of repetition because you're using this stuff in music, but you also start using it more creatively, and you get to where you can improvise. And when you can improvise something, that really pushes your coordination. Improvisation requires coordination, a base level of it, but it also pushes the coordination even more. And so that's an area that you want to get to. So play along to songs a bunch. Play along to your favorite songs. The more you smoothen out these fill transitions, the more fun playing the songs is going to be anyways. And the better the fill transitions you're going to get, the more songs you play and you learn. And number 3, pick a coordination method, like a method book, and stick with it. I love realistic rock. If you want to get into jazz coordination, a really good one is Advanced Techniques for the Modern Drummer, Jim Chapin. It does get advanced and challenging quickly. So if you're brand new to the drums, I recommend you start with realistic rock. but this is a great next one. Or if you're just super into jazz and that's something you want to really focus a lot on, this is a great way to do it. Something my drum teacher in high school always told me was the best drummers in the world can play jazz really well, and pretty much can play any style really well. And so he always told me, hey, even though, Steven, you want to be a rock drummer, learn the jazz stuff and that's going to carry over into your rock playing. And sure enough, that's true. And there's so many drummers out there that they can dip their feet into any style, and you hear the jazz coming out in their rock, and you hear some of the Latin abilities coming out in their jazz, which is so cool. And so practicing jazz is a fantastic way to really push coordination. But if you're brand new, I definitely recommend starting with the Carmine Appice Realistic Rock. You'll have a lot of fun with that method. It's really fun. Number 4, do the dynamic independence exercise with everything, whether it's apart from a song or it's a groove out of Realistic Rocks, whatever you're practicing. Practice doing the dynamic independence, controlling your volumes, one limb independent of the others, and that's going to really help push the coordination. And lastly, number 5, practice to a metronome. That should be a given. That should be something that we're all always doing. Practice to a metronome, but better yet, use a metronome app like Gap Click. This is a really cool one to practice metronome weaning. We've got a specific lesson here on the channel about this, so I'll link it below. But what we want to do is practice weaning ourselves off of a metronome so that we don't need a metronome to play with good time. We want to use a metronome as a training tool so that then once we don't have it, we still play with good time. That's the difference between a top pro and an average drummer. The average drummer sounds choppy and mechanical when playing to a metronome, but the pro sounds awesome with or without a metronome. And so what we want to do is use that metronome to really show us where we're speeding up, where we're slowing down, so that we can get really solid, rock solid with our time. And a great way to do it is to gradually strip the metronome out from under us and play to a quarter note click, and then a half note click, and then a whole note click, and so on. And Gap Click is a great app for doing that. Again, this is not even an official endorsement. I'm just a fan of that app. It's been really helpful in my practice and in my students' practice. So go check that one out too. All right, as we wrap up, I want you to leave a comment below. What is your weakness when it comes to fill transitions? Because if you can pinpoint that, and you can verbalize it, whether you write it here in the comments or you write it down somewhere else privately, doesn't matter. But I want you thinking about this. Where is your weakness when it comes to fill transitions? Does it go way back to what we first talked about with the singles on the pad? Like, are you having trouble going from 8ths to 16ths or 8ths to quarter notes, and those are sloppy? You're not able to do that well with a metronome? Start there. That might be it. Do that, and you're well on your way to playing smooth fills. Do you need to focus some more on your aural learning? Like, do you just need to repeat things over and over again, get them more ingrained in your head so you know the groove like the back of your hand? Do you need to practice your fills over and over again so that you're more aware of what you're doing? Do you just need to build more coordination? Maybe you haven't spent time working through a coordination groove method. Maybe that's something you need to more intentionally practice. Or maybe you've been doing that, but maybe your practicing is lopsided and you do so much technical stuff, but not musical application. Maybe you need to learn more songs. Maybe it's time you push past the fears and you get out there and you start jamming with people. Maybe it's time you play at your church. Maybe it's time you play with the worship band. It's time you conquer the fears, and even though in the back of your head there might still be that nagging worry that, I might not play this fill perfectly, sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to do it and know that, all right, I'm going to do the best that I can. I've practiced this stuff. There's nothing else left to do but to do it and just let it happen, whatever is going to happen. Learn from mistakes, learn from failures. Treat every experience as a learning experience, whether you're jamming with friends or you're playing at like an open mic or you're jamming with a band, you're playing at church, whatever you're doing. Sure, there's always going to be that worry about mistakes. You're always going to not want to make mistakes, but I don't want that to be a huge fear. I don't want you to be fearing fills because of that fear of transitions. You can conquer this, you can overcome this and not have to worry about playing stuff out of time and being clumsy. It all comes down to awareness and being intentional, and you are fully capable of doing that. I hope this encourages you to take action. I hope this empowers you to get some results. Go to the practice room. Let me know how it goes. I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I've enjoyed digging into this. I love talking about fills and creativity and ways to help give you more freedom on the drums, because that's what this is all about. So many of the technical things we do, they're a means to an end, but that end is creative, improvisational freedom. That's the dream. That's what I think you want. That's what I've always wanted and worked toward. I want to help you get there too. All right, thanks for watching today. I will see you on the next lesson. Have a great week. Stay non-glamorous.